Christmas Eve 2015 in Albuquerque, New Mexico, a local woman is viciously attacked on one of the city's trails.
She was out for a run. She encountered somebody who tackled her to the ground and dragged her into the bushes and sexually assaulted her.
She must have been extremely scared. This is definitely an instance where someone's fight or flight instincts are gonna kick in, and fortunately for her, she had the instinct to get out of there as quickly as possible.
The survivor happens to be a talented artist and provides police with a sketch of the assailant.
That sketch became such a key piece of evidence, and I'll tell you, in my 20 years of doing this, it's the only one I've ever had. I've never had a victim do their own sketch of their offender. It was incredibly accurate.
One by one, the leads run dry. The survivor lives in fear that she may once again cross paths with the rapist.
It kind of hit me to say, you know what, I'm not satisfied with what we're doing. We have to do more because we have to find this person.
Then investigators hear of a remarkable emerging forensic technique that could help them break this case once and for all.
Forensic genetic genealogy is a game changer.
It makes me want to say to everybody out there hiding in the shadows, welcome to the new light of day. Genetic genealogy is here and it is not going away.
Criminals who have hidden in the shadows for years find there's no escaping science and their own family DNA. Welcome to Bloodline Detectives. Albuquerque, New Mexico, a vibrant city renowned for its multicultural charm and breathtaking natural landscapes.
Albuquerque is the largest city in the state of New Mexico. The metro area is probably 650, 700,000 people. It's got a really diverse population, sort of a unique and rich cultural history.
We have a large mix of Native Americans that have been here for hundreds, if not thousands of years. A large Spanish population that also lived here for hundreds of years, mixed in with, over the past few decades, an emergence of technology, manufacturing, and national laboratories like Los Alamos, which was just in the movie Oppenheimer, and Intel computer chips has a big factory out here. So it's a big mix of lots of different generations of persons. We are a mid-sized American city, and we are not immune to what lots of cities face that have diversity of culture and people that move in and out with frequency.
If you ask the citizens of Albuquerque what is the one thing that is holding the community back, it's the inability to get a handle on some of those larger challenges. It's a community that has, unfortunately, higher levels of violent crime, in particular gun crime.
Despite Albuquerque's difficulties with crime, it remains an attractive place to live that has plenty of scenic spots, including the Rio Grande River that runs through the city.
This was an area that would have been popular with anyone who lives in the area that just wants to go outside of their house to a trail where they can run, they can walk, get some fresh air. It wouldn't be an uncommon place to see people exercising. It would definitely be a place where if you are out jogging or exercising that, you would want to just be aware of your surroundings. It could probably be a little bit remote. There's a good chance that you could be out there and never really encounter anyone, which unfortunately might make it a good place for a crime to happen.
On Christmas Eve 2015, a local woman decides to go jogging along one of the Rio Grande River trails.
Our victim was a single mother. She's an educator here in Albuquerque, in town. She's athletic. Running was something that she would do quite often. The area that she went running in was about as residential suburbia as you can get. Schools were nearby. There's a public library close to where the incident took place. And it was a trail that she was very familiar with because it's near her home. She could go out her front door and get onto this trail fairly quickly. and had run on it dozens of times prior to this incident. It should be safe, but unfortunately there's certain dangerous realities for a woman or a man to run alone in certain areas. And in this case, there was an absolute predator on the trail that day that there's no way she could have had any idea what she was going to run into. She heard somebody running behind her on the same trail very fast, and it kind of startled her. And it was a man who had these red pants on that kind of made a lot of noise, like swooshing back and forth. She lost sight of the man as he was running much faster than she was at the time, and she got to a particular fork in the trail. One part of the trail, if she stays on it, it keeps her somewhat elevated where she can see neighborhoods, the neighborhoods can see her, or she can cut off kind of into this wooded area that will lead her right next to the river. So a little bit more scenic, a little bit more peaceful and serene. And she's taken both trails in the past. In this case, she decided to take the more serene trail into the woods. She saw the man who had just passed her on the trail with the red pants kind of standing up next to a tree right off of the trail.
And it caused her some sort of hesitation. She had an instinct that something wasn't right, and sadly that instinct was proven correct, that once she got closer to his location, he actually tackled her to the ground and dragged her into the bushes and sexually assaulted her.
He ended up pinning her down with both of his hands on both of her shoulders. He pulled her pants down all the way down to her ankles, but then also pulled up her shirt, exposing her breasts. During this ordeal, she was pleading, don't do this. I don't want you to do this. This isn't what I want.
He threatened to kill her if she made too much noise to alert anyone about it. She initially was screaming, but when he made those threats, she looked around and realized he can probably kill me and no one's ever going to even hear this or know about it.
She said that it all of a sudden kind of stopped, but she could feel that he pulled up his shirt and that he reached into his back pocket. As he reached into his back pocket, it appeared he pulled out a cell phone. At that moment, she said that she could hear what she thought was 1 to 2 clicks on his cell phone as if he was taking a picture.
She thought back to an actual self-defense course that she had taken for women that talked about if you're under attack and you're overpowered, a strategy to try to calm the attacker down so that you can at least escape safely at some point of the encounter.
After the assault took place, she was able to get away by convincing him to run in one direction while she was able to turn around and basically run in the opposite direction.
It's just a real testament to her composure and her courage to have the presence of mind to actually talk to the attacker afterwards. She was very right to be concerned that he might actually kill her or harm her further. And so she, according to her, told him that if he went in one direction, she would return home in the other direction, and sort of convinced him to leave her alone.
She runs back the exact way she came, as quick as she can towards her house. She continued to run home, and at that point decided that she did not want to call police, which is not uncommon with sexual assault survivors in many cases. But she did call a rape crisis hotline on the telephone to tell them what happened and seek their advice.
The Rape Crisis Centre asks her if she can come in for a sexual assault exam.
Being Christmas Eve, this is a very unfortunate time for any of this to have happened, but when she got home, she arranged for someone to come and take care of her young child at the time so that she herself could get some help and get some treatment at a local rape crisis center.
She came and saw us for a SANE exam, and we were able to collect evidence, and she didn't choose to report to the law enforcement at that time. but you can always go back and report at a later date as well.
In the aftermath of an attack, many victims of rape find it difficult to report the crime to police.
Albuquerque Police Department is also, their sex crimes division is in our building, so it makes it very convenient. I think it's a lot more approachable. And so it removes some of the barriers that they might face to reporting. So we have about 10% more than the national average of victims who report to law enforcement, which is phenomenal. And so we absolutely always encourage people to report to law enforcement, but knowing that everybody's experience is different, justice looks different for every victim.
Usually after a victim has consulted with a psychologist, a psychiatrist, talked to their family, and really come to that decision on their own. Some victims are adamant about reporting to law enforcement immediately. Others want to have some time to think about how they want to move forward. And so the Rape Crisis Center is in a position to just support the victim and allow them to go through the process at their own pace.
Now that the rape kit has been completed, will the Bloodline detectives be given the go-ahead to track down this predator and put him behind bars? Christmas Eve 2015, a local woman goes for a run along one of the Rio Grande River trails in Albuquerque, New Mexico. She passes by a fellow jogger and instinctively feels nervous in his presence. Unfortunately, her gut feeling proves correct. The man re-emerges and tackles her to the ground before dragging her off the trail and viciously sexually assaulting her. Afterwards, the distraught victim goes to a rape crisis center and undergoes a sex assault examination, but is fearful to report the crime to law enforcement.
Her day-to-day life following this experience must have been very difficult in a lot of different ways, because this is something that a lot of people really struggle to move past. A lot of victims relive and re-experience what happened to them. A lot of them could be in fear, not knowing that their attacker is going to come and find them and do this or do something even worse to them in the future. So for this particular victim, she must have lived in great fear for a long time, not knowing where this guy was and if he's going to come back for her.
March the 7th, 2016. 3 months after the attack, the survivor bravely decides to share her story with the police.
The victim does decide to make a police report. So it's been, just about 3 months since the attack occurred. She makes the police report and it gets assigned to a detective at the sheriff's department right away to look into.
She, being an artist herself, was able to create a sketch of the individual who had attacked her and was really able to put pen to paper on how this person looked like from her perspective. She was able to describe him as being a younger gentleman, about 5'7". He was clean shaven, didn't have a beard or a mustache. He had brown hair that seemed to be sticking out of the hat that he was wearing. He also had brown eyes, and she described him as being athletic. He seemed muscular, of an athletic body type.
That sketch became such a key piece of evidence, and I'll tell you, in my 20 years of doing this, it's the only one I've ever had. I've never had a victim do their own sketch of their offender.
Equipped with this vital piece of evidence, investigators devise a plan to catch the callous attacker.
Typically, you're going to want to take a very detailed report from the victim, and all of the relevant details about what the suspect was wearing and their physical description were all very important. They're going to want to canvass the area to look for additional either victims or witnesses. They're going to want to examine prior police reports, unsolved reports about other sexual assaults. Obviously upload the data, the specimen, into CODIS to see if there's a DNA match through the national database to see if there are any leads that could be generated that way.
CODIS is a database that the FBI developed decades ago, where law enforcement at the state and federal levels put profiles of offenders into. Violent crimes like murders, armed robberies, domestic violence, sexual assaults, crimes of this nature get your DNA put into CODIS once you're convicted of the crime by a court. And if your DNA shows up on a crime scene somewhere else, it can be compared against CODIS, which can easily identify a possible offender. The thing with CODIS is it's not everyone who's arrested. That's not how it works. You have to be convicted. It has to be certain felony crimes that you're convicted of. And it only is going to look at people who have been convicted. So if you've never been arrested or convicted of a serious felony crime, you're not in CODIS. So we might have your DNA, but you weren't in CODIS, so we actually don't know who you are.
During the initial part of the investigation, the police worked very hard at looking at those that are closest to the victim. So they were out there speaking with all of her past boyfriends, anyone she had been in a relationship with, speaking with any of her male family members and friends, all of which ultimately were eliminated. And at the same time, they're also going out collecting DNA from these individuals and seeing if it matches the DNA that was collected at the crime scene, which unfortunately they weren't able to identify a match.
Just as the investigation seems to be slowing down, 3 months pass and the survivor believes she has seen her perpetrator again.
During the summer of 2016, this victim went into a local sandwich shop in town, and as soon as she walked in, she thought she encountered the guy that had attacked her several months earlier. So as soon as she saw this individual, she ran out and contacted law enforcement, saying she might have ran into him.
I was in my office. She gave me a phone call. She said, I think I found the offender. I said, okay. So she gave me the information of what was going on. The person that she saw fit the description. Was about 5'8", 5'9", went to our local university here and was a prominent athlete here, which matches the colors of what he would have been wearing. We ended up doing a warrant for him at his dorm. So we ended up doing a body warrant on him. We ended up doing a warrant of his dorm as well, where we ended up taking his cell phone. Once we confiscated his cell phone, we ended up doing a warrant on his cell phone to extract the information on there, because we're looking for pictures as well. Since in the initial interviews, she said that there was pictures taken of her. We extracted his cell phone. We didn't find any pictures of her. We ended up doing a swab for him for DNA. We got all that information, sent it back up to Santa Fe for them to do a test. We got his DNA back. Once we got his DNA back, it was also negative as well for the DNA that was sent on the rape kit.
It is a devastating outcome for the survivor who thought she had identified her attacker.
The case eventually went cold when everyone that the police had interviewed, including ex-boyfriends, friends, had been interviewed. DNA had been collected. The guy at the sandwich shop had been interviewed. Once all of that didn't lead anywhere, investigators were really sort of stuck at square one, which means that the case unfortunately went cold.
She made a comment that said, well, at least we tried, and I know that I can move on now knowing that we tried the best we could to find this person. And at that moment, it kind of hit me to say, you know what, I'm not satisfied with what we're doing. We have to do more because we have to find this person. It almost seemed to me like she was happy with what we did, that we tried our best, almost as if she was ready to move on. But to me, I wasn't satisfied. I went to the DA's office, and that's when I talked to them and I said, what can we do? There's something we need to do to help her. What can we do? And at that moment, there was nothing. But now I know that it planted a seed, put something in their mind to know that if something came up later on, that maybe we would have a chance to catch this individual.
The seed of hope that has been planted is a forensic technique that has solved hundreds of cold cases across the globe. Forensic investigative genetic genealogy. Can this emerging science finally put this predator behind bars? Christmas Eve, Albuquerque, New Mexico, 2015. A local woman is out jogging when she's attacked and viciously sexually assaulted by an unknown male. The distraught woman happens to be an artist and provides police with a sketch of the assailant. 3 months into the investigation, she believes that she has seen the rapist locally, but the identification proves false. Now police are hoping a cutting-edge forensic technique can finally identify the attacker.
One of the things that we were trying to do was to really establish a proactive and professional investigations team that really didn't exist before. There were certainly investigators in the office, but they weren't doing the kind of cutting edge work that I thought we were capable of. And so what we established was something called the Crime Strategies Unit that really tried to not replicate the same capacity that the local police agencies had, but to do special analytical and data-driven work that oftentimes local police agencies just didn't have the time or expertise to sort of invest in. But I also wanted to make sure that we were doing some novel work on trying to solve some of the unsolved cases, some of the cases that had gone cold over the years, both homicides and sexual assaults. And, you know, when I first started reading about how the case in California involving the Golden State Killer and others was put together, and the work that was done on forensic genealogy, it seemed like an ideal fit for this new team and this new unit. And so I reached out to the head of that unit, Kyle Hartsock, who's just a tremendous natural-born police officer.
First and foremost, to do a forensic genealogy case, you need a sufficient amount of DNA. You know, you can't just run it off of any amount of DNA easily. This case had it. So it met that minimum qualifying amount of DNA that was left behind. 2, our victim was still alive. This wasn't a homicide case. This victim was alive. To give her the best chance to tell her who her offender was and let her feel that little bit of safety that police were able to solve that crime, and possibly even get justice in court, meant a whole lot to the entire team, from the original detective to me to the prosecutor's office. And the area it happened in was somewhat less populated. One of the beliefs I had early on was our offender probably lived nearby. This was not a highly popular running trail where hundreds of people a day go running on it. This has maybe 10 people a day at most, with the perfect weather, run on it. So that our offender was probably very, very local to the area and very familiar with the area. This wouldn't be somebody traveling through town that would pick this area. It's too remote. So that meant that predator was still in my community, and that's what I wanted to find.
That's when we really started to get things going, and we immediately started trying to identify the right genealogical experts, the right laboratory to work with to get this work done. We did a lot of research, and CSU did a lot of research on how the cases in California and the Golden State Killer was put together and sort of replicating those sorts of things.
So what exactly is this forensic technique that has been cracking the coldest of cold cases?
Forensic genetic genealogy, also known as investigative genetic genealogy, is the process of taking unknown DNA, typically collected at crime scenes, uploading the DNA to DNA databases, such as GEDmatch, hoping to find a family member who's related to the person that they're ultimately searching for, the suspect in a crime.
It could be this person, but it could be their brother, right? It could be a close first cousin of theirs or a half sibling. We still have to put our detective shoes on and do everything that we're used to doing, which is good interviews, right? Surveillance, collecting physical evidence, tying this whole case together. We need a beginning, a middle, and an ending of a story, because one day we're gonna have to explain this to a jury. The family tree is gonna point us in a direction, and then we do what we normally do.
Investigators search on GEDmatch, a website built for genetic genealogy research.
We actually had 3 college interns for the summer assigned to my investigative unit. And they were young and hungry, and they just thought, anything we can do here is going to be cool and helpful. I said, we are going to learn investigative genealogy. We are going to learn how to build family trees. We are going to buy the Ancestry.com accounts, and we're going to do this. Here's a YouTube video series on how to build a family tree. We're going to go really hands-on with this thing and get it done. And they loved the challenge. It was a lot of fun sleuthing social media profiles and newspaper clippings from decades ago to build out these family trees, knowing that on any given day, this could be the day we get our bad guy.
However, there are limitations. Users must opt in to allow law enforcement to use their data.
Just over 3 or 4 months building out many family trees, conducting interviews, and one day a new profile was uploaded that was opted in for law enforcement, and it was a second cousin. And it stuck out like a sore thumb when you logged into GetMatch, and we would log into GetMatch daily. When I contacted the person, because I wanted to learn more about their family tree, I actually met Dr. Kimmy Price. She contacted me back and said, I'm the one who uploaded this profile. I'm a genealogy researcher on the side, and I talked to my client, told him that you reached out, and he is willing to let me help you guys in the investigation, considering I already know a lot about his family. So that is actually how we met. It wasn't us looking for a genealogist. We stumbled upon one while we were doing our search, and she was amazing.
About an hour and a half later, after I'd sent the email, I received a phone call on my cellular, and it was Commander Hartzog and some detectives, and they asked me a flurry of questions to determine my experience. And then they became very quiet and asked me if I would consider helping with the cold case. Oh, heck yeah. I was thrilled to be able to do that. The match for the family friend to the perp was about 94 centimorgans, which ballpark is third cousin. A centimorgan is a measure of how much DNA is shared between individuals. A parent-child will share between 3,500 and 4,000 centimorgans. Brothers and sisters, about 2,500 centimorgans. First cousins, around 1,000. Aunts, uncles, grandparents, about 1,600. There are ranges that vary for the relationship level. Third cousins share great-great-grandparents in common. And each individual has 8 sets of great-great-grandparents. In this case, on the father's side, there would be 4 sets of great-great-grandparents. And going back to that time and place, large families were the norm. It wasn't unusual to see family groups with 10 children apiece. And so by the time I had finished building out a family tree for the father's side of the family, I was looking at 6,500 individuals. It was a lot. What I had to do once I had finished with that was try to find a way to exclude parts of that tree to narrow down possibilities. So what I began looking at was individuals who matched a family friend, but of course had no match to the perp. And by doing that, I was able to whittle it down to a single set of great-grandparents.
She filled us in on what she had found on, his second cousin's family up to that point, which included roots that go back to parts of New Mexico and southern Colorado. So it was a true collaboration on a near daily basis, going back and forth. She did this all for free, by the way. She would work on this in her off hours, in the evenings, on weekends. She would email updates when she had them, and we would do the same back with her until Dr. Price found an obituary for a 2-year-old. And that cracked the case wide open.
Will this obituary lead to the arrest of a sexual predator that tore a woman's life apart on Christmas Eve? Albuquerque, New Mexico, police are investigating the 2015 sexual assault of a local woman who was viciously attacked by an unknown assailant while jogging along the Rio Grande River. Despite the tireless efforts of both the survivor and police, all leads run dry and the case goes cold. Now investigators turn to an emerging crime-fighting tool, forensic investigative genetic genealogy. In building a family tree of the perpetrator, they've identified a promising lead, an obituary of a child.
In this obituary from a newspaper in Albuquerque around 1996, 1997, it mentions that a 2-year-old had lost their life, and it listed the surviving family members of the 2-year-old. The surviving family members included people directly in the family tree of our offender. That's how Dr. Price was focused in on this obituary. But it mentioned a 2-month-old younger brother who had survived, someone by the name of Angel Duran. Angel Duran, at 2 months old in 1996 and 1997, would have put him at pretty much an ideal age range from our offender and related to our offender. When we searched the name Angel Duran in all the systems that we're able to search, we could not find anyone with a birthday close to the one in the obituary with that same name. The obituary mentioned that the 2-year-old big brother of Angel had actually been murdered by his dad, which was very sad and tragic. Having worked crimes against children here in Albuquerque for decades, we know that siblings of murdered children are often put into foster care and possibly even adopted. And if they're adopted, they might change their last name. We went back into our databases, and instead of searching Angel Duran with a birthday around 1996, we just took the last name out. We said, tell me about people named Angel, born in 1996 in the Albuquerque area. And within seconds, we found somebody who matched that description, Angel Goulet, and when we looked up his address, he lived about less than a quarter mile from where the sexual assault happened in this neighborhood. And, you know, hair stood up on our necks, and we were so incredibly excited that we think we might have found our offender.
Excited by this new lead, investigators set out to track down their suspect.
I remember getting a phone call from Kyle Hartsock, and he was pretty excited. I could tell on the phone that he and his team believed that they had narrowed down the right suspect, and it wasn't definitive yet because we had to make a point-to-point comparison. We weren't going to build a case simply on forensic genealogy. We actually needed to make a one-to-one match on a freshly collected sample of DNA. And so he came to me and said, we think we have the right person, and we would like permission to conduct surveillance and see if we can obtain a new DNA sample.
We found out that his wife was in the hospital for a relatively routine procedure. She posted about it on social media. When we saw the post, we went to the hospital really kind of in the nick of time because they were checking out. They were leaving, and they had been in one of the hospital rooms by themselves. Once they left, I told my agents, make sure that they leave the hospital like they're done, they're not coming back, this isn't just a walk around. It wasn't. They got picked up by a family member and completely left holding their belongings. The prosecutor that was helping with the case said that is abandoned property now, anything they left in the room. And we took 2 styrofoam cups, like the kind of cups the hospitals have to give you ice and water. There was 2 cups in the room. We took both carefully, placed them in evidence bags, and overnighted them to our lab to get DNA tested as quick as they could.
The DNA test finally provides the answer the Bloodline detectives have been waiting for.
We got our man. That's it. Case closed, without a doubt. The DNA is matching Angel Goulet.
Police spring into action to arrest Angel Goulet.
In January of 2020, the agents from our office executed a search warrant and looking for evidence of the event, of the crime itself. They actually took Mr. Goulet into custody, and after a short period of time, he confessed to the crime.
Once I showed him the test results pointing to him as the offender, he finally admitted in his own head he had no other choice here but to admit he was the one that did this crime. Can you tell me about that day?
That day I was running, I don't know what I was thinking. And she came running down, and that's what happened. And that's, I ran behind her, and then, that's what happened. I took her clothes off me.
When did you get the idea that you were gonna do this?
I didn't, honestly, I didn't know it was gonna happen. Like, this is me, oh, this is me. This is me, I'm running this way. Then when I get to this like little alley kind of place, it's like little roads like this, and then I went down this way, and she's running this way, and then I stopped, there's a tree.
John, however you need.
And that's where I ran, and then this road, there's a tree. I stopped at the tree because I was getting a breather. Didn't know anything was gonna happen. And she followed me down here and then went back around through the bosque. Like, there's no reason why she would have went that way. And so I came and then I ran that way, and then of course, yeah, that's what happened.
Did you take a picture of her?
I think so, but I don't.
Where's that picture at?
It's deleted. I once I realized what I did, like, I was like, wow, this is gonna come back to me. Like, I don't know what the I was thinking. And I deleted the picture, and then I was like, I went to go back to look for her, apologize, and tell her that I was sorry and everything. And I don't know what I was thinking, and that would never happen again. Like, I don't even run down there anymore because of what happened. I was like,
Would you like to write her an apology letter? I'll give you a blank sheet of paper and the pen.
of course.
Angel Gurule runs investigators through the events of that Christmas Eve afternoon.
I wanted him to show me exactly how it happened. Again, part of that goes to the credibility of his statements. Only 2 people knew what happened that day, right? One is the victim, but she only saw parts of it. The other one was our offender. If he truly was our offender, and I believed he was, I wanted him to show me exactly what he did. I wanted to know his thought process through it, and I wanted to record it on video in case we had to have a jury decide one day if he was telling the truth or not to the police about this attack. They could actually watch him do it in the environment. It happened to work out too. This was early January. So environmentally, this area looked identical to how it did in 2015. There's no leaves on the trees. It's wintertime, right? The ground is a little bit more bare. How much you can see through the trees is going to change from the summer to the winter. So I said that I told my team there was no better time than right now to have him do this for us, if he will. And he agreed to do it. He literally walked us through it. He showed us the approximate point that he saw her, where he ran by her. He took me to the exact trail and what he believed was the tree that he was leaning against when she ran by. He was able to point out where she was on the trail up ahead when he decided to commit this crime, to take off sprinting. He walked me over to the approximate area where he tackled her to the ground and committed the sexual assault. And the entire time I'm asking him, very almost news media type interview with him. Tell me what you did next, right? What'd you think right here? And he seemed to be very credible and very forthright with explaining what he remembered and where it happened. And so I felt his statement was incredibly credible and truthful at that point.
Now police have a clearer insight into the mind of Angel Gurule.
Angel Gurule did not have a very checkered criminal past. He did have a few police reports in our system. One was having an inappropriate sexual relationship with a minor, like a teenage girl when he was 18 or 19, which was actually within several months of our attack. The case wasn't followed up on by the detectives, and nothing happened. There was actually a chance for DNA to be tested in that case that he left behind. It wasn't tested. Had it been tested, it might have been in CODIS. We might have actually had a hit, or the sheriff's department would have had a hit way back in 2016 right away, but that opportunity was missed.
He had a traumatic past, which is very unfortunate. And I know a lot of times people have mixed emotions in situations where it's a younger perpetrator and they have had trauma. And the thing that I always say is, when somebody has been traumatized, that's an explanation for their behavior, but it's not an excuse.
I would describe him as a sexual predator. He is someone that clearly has abnormal desires and quite possibly has abnormal fantasies that on that particular day he acted out on. And given the chance, he might do it again.
I don't think he had a motive. I think that it was just it was a crime of opportunity. I think he was there. I don't know what was going on in his head at the time, but I think that at that particular moment, he saw a woman that he found was attractive. He's out in the middle of nowhere, and unfortunately, he took advantage of that.
Openly confessing to his crime, Angel Gurulé enters a plea deal, which significantly shortens his sentence.
Before his case ever actually reached the point of going to a trial in front of a jury, Angel agreed to a plea deal with prosecutors in which he was agreeing to plead guilty to 2 counts of sexual assault instead of taking his case to trial.
He pled out. He was looking at a possible, I think they said 80 years. He pled out to 12 years in prison. Our victim has to live with this the rest of her life. She has a life sentence because this is something she has to live with the rest of her life. Do I think a life sentence is what he deserves? Part of me says yes.
The survivor addresses her attacker during sentencing.
The victim told Angel the same things that she'd been telling us ever since he was identified. While she doesn't feel bad for him, she wanted him to get help on the things that had haunted him, and she wanted no more violence to occur and hoped that his time in prison can help him find that path.
I think that when a victim sees the person who hurt them sentenced, sent to jail, there is a large sense of closure. But that doesn't mean they're not going to wake up and deal with the consequences of that trauma for the rest of their life. Right? Like I said, they're going to learn and they're going to grow and they're going to heal and they're going to become beautiful people. But that doesn't mean they're not going to have to deal with it. But I think that's a really important step in being able to close that and maybe move on to the next chapter of their life.
She's a victim that I'll always remember for her strength throughout really many, many parts of this case. Once you look at how terrible the attack was, she continued to show resilience and strength and determination several times over several years, all the way to the sentencing. She was truly one of a kind as a victim, but also resembles what a lot of victims go through.
That said, we can never restore her sense of peace. We can never eliminate the effects of trauma. Those things will last a lifetime and will linger for a lifetime.
Investigators reflect on the successes of this case and what the future of forensic investigative genetic genealogy holds.
This is the first case in the state of New Mexico that used genetic testing to solve a crime is huge. And for me to be part of it, it means a lot to me.
This case would still be cold without forensic genealogy playing a critical role. I have no doubt that we would still be sitting here today with a victim who would be struggling still to put her life back in order and no sense of who this person was or where this person was. It was a proof of concept for myself and for our agency and for the investigators that we had discovered an entirely new tool to try and solve some of the most difficult cases that we have.
People should never give up. People should never give up on a case. They should never give up on an identity. They should never give up on a loved one. Because there are people like me out there and there are more coming. And as the technology improves, it's just going to get better and more cases are going to get solved.
I think if you were a sexual assault survivor, this spoke volumes. This told you, and police don't give up, right? We're not going to give up. Prosecutors aren't going to give up. We always want to find who committed this crime. We need to unmask them. We need to make what they did transparent to the community. And so I think this showed a great bout of confidence to our community that we are very capable of doing this, and we plan on doing it forever.
Xin chào tất cả quý vị các bạn, hôm nay mình xin giới thiệu cùng em khoác chiếc áo tới ra đồng, dù trời đổ nắng chang chang vẫn khoang để nghĩa tình đừng nhạt đừng phai, thương nhau rồi đừng cởi áo cho ai. Thuyền tình tôi cứ lênh đênh dòng trôi, và người con gái tôi yêu nơi làng quê, có ai ngờ chân lắm buồn mà tôi ngỡ gót chân tiên. Cắt nửa vầng trăng, cắt nửa vầng trăng, tôi làm con đò nhỏ, chặt đôi câu thơ, bẻ đôi câu thơ, tôi làm mái chèo nước sông, đưa tôi về, đưa tôi về với người tôi yêu, để cùng hát khúc dân ca quê mình, để tôi sống giữa bao nhiêu ân tình, bao ân tình mộc mạc làng quê, trưa nắng hè gọi nhau dân gian trẻ xanh, cùng em khoác chiếc áo tới ra đồng, dù trời đổ nắng chang chang vẫn quang để ân tình đừng nhạt đừng phai, thương nhau rồi đừng cởi áo cho ai. Thuyền tình tôi cứ lênh đênh dòng trôi, và người con gái tôi yêu nơi làng quê, có ai ngờ chân lắm buồn mà tôi ngỡ gót chân tiên hơn, để cùng ngâm khúc dân ca quê mùa, để nghe tiếng sáo thanh thang cánh cò. Đã có lần em dần hơn tôi, đêm ra đồng em đổ ánh trăng vàng đi. Nào ngờ chẳng chút nguôi ngoai hương buồn, vầng trăng lại sáng trong hơn đầy đồng. Câu ca rằng hết dần rồi thương, áo nâu xong em nhuộm tình tôi. Nào đâu dễ có phôi phai thời gian, còn đây mai khung ca dao em và tôi. Chốn quê nghèo ta có mình, một ngày bằng mấy trăm năm hơi người.
Yesterday, I believe that love was here to stay. Tell me where I've gone astray.
I can't begin to imagine what was going on in her head.
Brought up in poverty, Ruth Ellis fought her way to a life mixing with the elite of 1950s London. This was where she met driver David Blakely.
He was delightful, he was charming.
The man she loved, the man who would abuse her.
David gave me a black eye.
And the man she would kill.
Ruth Ellis sentenced to death in accordance with the law.
He tried desperately hard to make her say in front of the jury that she didn't intend to kill the man.
She was the last woman to be hanged in Britain.
She came to me as though she was just walking the ordinary way, walked right to me. She just puckered her lips so she was trying to smile, you know. She's a brave woman.
7 decades on, the controversy and the tragic drama of her story still has the power to captivate.
This role is definitely heavier than any other role. I'm really surprised by the way that I'm so emotionally affected by it.
But did the mother of two deserve to be sent to the gallows?
She'd endured such a huge amount of physical and emotional abuse by the time that she turned up at the Magdala that Easter Sunday.
2 lives that didn't make it to 30, and one of them didn't deserve it, and the other shouldn't have done it.
She accepted her fate.
My tablets all over and done with anyway.
I'll be your sunshine if you say you'll be mine, and we'll spend our days together. In any kind of weather, there'll be blue skies above. I'll be a moonbeam if you stay a true dream, and we'll...
The 1950s were an incredibly narrow time to be a woman. You were really pushed into 2 roles. The prime role was that of the happy housewife. There was the other role, which was more the one that Ruth was pushed into.
Ruth's life was as far from that of a 1950s housewife as you could get. By 26, she was the manager of an exclusive Knightsbridge nightclub. The little club was owned by Maury Conley, one of London's most notorious gangsters and pimps.
And he certainly had a lot of connections to the underworld in London at the time, which was thriving.
She had fallen into a world, the world of clubland, which for many people would have been disreputable and something that a decent girl didn't do, and was described as a nightclub hostess, a synonym for a prostitute.
She won his trust. She really knew what she was good at, and she was obviously a very good people person. She was ahead of her time.
All that we dream of.
Ruth was born in Rhyl, North Wales in 1926, the 5th of 6 children. Her father, Arthur Hornby, was a musician, and her mother, Bertha, was a Belgian Jewish refugee. When cinemas switched to talkies, Arthur lost his job, plunging the family into extreme poverty. They moved to London, but home life was harsh and violent.
I think life must have been really hard for Ruth as a young girl because she was being constantly moved about from school to school. Ruth's father was very abusive to her mother, and he eventually became abusive towards his children, especially his daughters.
Her childhood was pretty shambolic, but I think the big thing that sort of ran through her life was that she was incredibly independent and she was determined to make something of herself.
At the height of the war, aged just 16, she fell in love with a Canadian airman. When she got pregnant, he promised to marry her.
She'd got pregnant and had a baby outside of marriage, a source of great shame at that time. Having an illegitimate child was really problematic.
9 months after giving birth to her son Andre, she'd been abandoned. The man she thought she loved already had a family back in Quebec. By the end of the war, Ruth was working as a waitress in central London. She was determined to become self-sufficient, to make a proper life for herself and her son.
She was chasing the bright lights of London. She wanted to be a superstar. She was obviously a very good-looking lady who had a lot of character.
Ruth got work as a model and as a hostess in a Mayfair nightclub. She was earning £5 per week, plus drinks commission, more money than she had ever made before.
Good evening. Welcome. Ruth, you look wonderful. Thank you. Vicky, what do you think? Bloody gorgeous. Hello, sweet. Champagne? No, please.
But Ruth was desperate for stability, and hostessing would never give her that. In 1950, the now 24-year-old married one of her regulars. George Ellis was a dentist, 17 years her senior.
I don't think she was mad keen on him when she first met him. He, I think, effectively wore her down.
You know, one of the things that attracted her to George was the fact that he was a professional. He was a professional man. His social status was higher than that of her own.
Ruth left London for Southampton to give herself and her son a better life. It was not to be. George was a chronic alcoholic.
And from the off, it wasn't good. He was very jealous of her. She was quite jealous of him. And he was drinking incredibly heavily. It was just a terrible relationship from then on that got even worse because he became more and more violent.
In the spring of 1951, Ruth appeared in the film Lady Godiva Rides Again alongside Joan Collins. She was 4 months pregnant, and her marriage was on the rocks. By October, they'd separated. Ruth was back in London with Andre and her new baby daughter, Georgina.
The relationship Ruth had with George Ellis was completely and utterly toxic. There was no saving it.
Ruth had to return to her life as a hostess to support herself and her children. Then in 1953, Conley made Ruth the manager of the Little Club in Kensington.
That was a place where men frequented and had alcohol, and naturally most of the relationships were formed on the premise of a similarity or a love of drink, smoke, music, and a good time.
The job came with a large rent-free flat above the club. Now her family had a home, and she finally had the financial independence she craved.
And I think Ruth definitely saw that as a potential avenue to help her and her children, have more comfort and security.
But that success and stability would be short-lived. Within a year, she'd met David Blakely, the man who'd bring her world crashing down.
Can I buy you a drink?
I run this place, Mr. Blakely. Let me get you one.
Things were good for Ruth. She was the youngest club manageress in London. She had her own apartment. She was earning really well. She was looking after her kids. Considering the background that she had, it was when David really came into her life that things started to unravel.
David Blakely was a former public school boy who wanted to be a motor racing champion.
This is a 70-year-old racing suit that my uncle David wore. These are David's trophies from racing at Silverstone. And here, D.M. Blakely, number 593, the St. John's Horsefall meeting, Silverstone, July 1951. So he's just 22 years old, and he's coming in second at Silverstone. Incredibly dapper. A guy I not only looked up to, but was charming, fun, funny, caring.
David Blakely grew up in Sheffield. When he was a teenager, his family life was shattered when his father, a Scottish doctor, was accused of murdering his pregnant lover.
David's father, Dr. Blakely, found himself on a murder charge because this young woman and her child both died. And he was accused basically of killing them both, giving her some sort of medication that would bring on a miscarriage, but which did so in such a brutal way that the young woman ended up losing her life too.
After a trial, Dr. Blakely was acquitted and returned to being a GP. David's parents divorced. His mother married Humphrey Cook, one of Britain's wealthiest men, and David went to live in Cook's country estate.
I would spend the summers at the house in Penn in Buckinghamshire, and that was how I got to know David. I have fond memories of sitting in David's car and bouncing around the outrageous country roads in his 1946 MG.
Look, we call it the Emperor. This car is going to make my name. You don't believe me?
Ruth was 26 and David 24 when they met.
She saw a handsome, dashing, elegant young man who was different from other people she had known.
Ruth saw a more vulnerable side to David, beyond the charming and dapper racing driver.
It wasn't all sexually driven. From Ruth's perspective, she felt as though that she could help him. She could see he was extremely vulnerable, even though he had this facade of confidence.
This is Clive Gunnell and Anthony Finlater.
Hello.
Ant's been working on the car with me.
Well, he's the money and I'm the
Hello.
brains.
Hello. And this is Carol Finlater. Carol, Ruth Ellis. Ruth works at the Little Club.
Does she now? Manages it, actually. We brought champagne.
Oh, let's crack it open, shall we?
Unfortunately, Ant and Carol were snobs, really. They made it quite clear that they thought she was beneath them and very much beneath David too. No matter how lovely she was, they really couldn't really understand what David saw in her.
Despite being looked down on by his friends, Ruth and David became firm fixtures of the Chelsea and Kensington party scene. They seemed infatuated. He moved in with her and her children within a few weeks of meeting.
She was a really fun person to be around. She was always the person who would start a party, the last person to end a party. But having said that, the things that he kind of fell for with Ruth are the things that in the end he hated.
Ruth was given a tape recorder as a gift, and for the last months of her life, she recorded herself and David.
You're one of the biggest bloody liars I've ever met in my life. You've got to put that on record. Can I ring up one or two of your boyfriends, Mrs. Ellis?
David particularly disliked one of Ruth's admirers, Desmond Cusson, a former RAF pilot turned company director.
Desmond Cusson was strongly infatuated with Ruth, which really annoyed David Blakely. And so there was this love triangle, if you like, which is always doomed for disaster.
In May 1954, George Ellis filed for divorce. He accused Ruth of being an unfit mother and pressured her to allow a childless couple he knew to foster their daughter.
George Ellis hated the idea of his daughter living above a nightclub, saying he had a solution. Ruth didn't want to, so she clearly did have love for her daughter, but eventually there was an element of Ruth wanting something better for Georgina.
Ruth finally agreed. Georgina went to live with her father's friends in Cheshire, 200 miles away.
She didn't want to give Georgina up. I think she probably found it hard having a younger child around the house with the lifestyle that she was leading.
By that time, David was spending less and less time at home, putting his effort and money into his racing car, the Emperor.
He was working 18-hour days on this car, so he had found his direction. And as many of us had, when you find something that you love and you're so devoted to, that changes your life.
David spent most of the year away racing. In June, he was at Le Mans with the Bristol racing team. While he was gone, Desmond Cusson tried to break him and Ruth apart.
When David was away on race circuits, Desmond would have done his damnedest to spread as much ill will or ill feelings about Uncle David.
In London, Ruth throws a surprise party for David's 25th birthday.
Surprise! Oh, I'm so sorry, darling. David asked me to let you know he can't make it. Look, David's engaged to be married to Mary Dawson. He's been living here with me for months. You've been a lovely friend to him. Bless you.
That evening, Ruth invites Desmond Cusson to her flat and her bed.
She was furious. She was upset. So what she did, in revenge, was she slept with a man she knew David did not like.
David broke off his engagement and returned to London. Once again, Ruth believed they could have a happy future together. But the relationship came at a huge emotional and financial cost for Ruth. David continued having affairs, all the while living off her money.
Who wants him anyway? Penniless bastard. There are cheap skates and cheap skates. And I think I have met the cheapest of skates, ain't you? He really is the lowest of the low. He's just a little skunk.
And things were about to get much worse.
I wondered if I might get an advance on my wages.
Been sponging again, is he? I'm gonna have to start charging you rent on the flat.
You can't do that.
As their relationship deteriorated, it became more violent.
The intensity of all of that passion and love was equal to then the intensity of violence in that relationship, so which then segued into this kind of mental violence and mental abuse.
The physical abuse often left Ruth covered in bruises, though she would try to defend herself.
There are many instances where she took a good hiding. I know she was small in stature, but I think she threw a few punches back.
Those who knew David couldn't imagine him capable of such physical violence.
There are a lot of people of that age who do stupid things, but to the degree that he's been painted as such a monster, it's just hard to imagine.
Fed up with David's freeloading, Conley sacked Ruth, throwing her out of the flat. Desmond took her and Andre in.
And this is Ruth Ellis saying, Happy Christmas to everyone, and may Ruth have a mink coat in the new year. And may Desmond have all he wishes himself in the new year.
Ruth now had no job, no money, and no home of her own. But despite everything, she and David couldn't stay away from each other, even though his violence was escalating.
Oh, shut up. I have a black eye. David gave me a black eye. Sitting in a car park on New Year's night in Penn, Buckinghamshire at the Crown Hotel.
I think it was when you're in the center of that storm, it's really hard to see the full picture and the full perspective. And so it was playing it with that in mind and playing it that close to the flame.
I'm awfully afraid I'm falling in love with you.
No, seriously, Desmond, all joking aside, I think I've been a fool. She living with that drip for 18 months. Now, can you imagine it?
Ruth and Andre, her son, were now living with Desmond after she lost her job and home because of her relationship with David. Desmond hoped this would lead to him and Ruth becoming closer.
The only saving grace from her perspective at the time was Andre. And Desmond's promises around, how he would help Andre.
In February 1955, Ruth told Desmond she wanted to get her own flat. Desmond lent Ruth the deposit, unaware it would become a love nest for her and David.
It must have been difficult for you.
Well, it was sort of always the question that their association would discontinue. And I was prepared to put up with it, I think, at the time, and in the hopes that it would.
There was an element of him being genuine and genuinely caring about her, wanting to protect her. But the other was also around this sense of jealousy that why can't she see that a world with me is, far more safe and secure?
But whatever Desmond Cousin was hoping for, it wasn't happening. Ruth was now 2 months pregnant with David's baby.
It was one thing for him to use her as a sexual object, but for him to even consider a child with her would have been deeply inappropriate. Of the circles that he moved in, this is not on. I'm sure that gave expression in the violence that he used against her.
David, I am pregnant. I swear.
He punched her in her stomach. She lost the baby. The impact of that psychologically on Ruth, you can't even imagine it, I don't think. And that was really the beginning of the end.
She was miscarrying, obviously the hormones, the emotions that come with that.
Ruth was devastated. She was struggling physically and emotionally. Then, just a few days after the miscarriage, David told her he loved her again.
The side of his behaviour that became mental abuse, of his disappearance and return, so the constant anticipation of his return, I think psychologically impacts someone so that you can't find any stability in your sanity or physically either. And I think that could drive a person quite mad.
With promises of being a changed man, David said he'd be at Ruth's flat by 8 p.m. to spend the weekend with her. He didn't show, having already told his family he'd ended the relationship.
There's no doubt that he believed he had ended it, that he didn't want to go back, and he was seeking the advice and solace and company of two of his best friends.
Finlayter's residence? Is David there? No.
Hello?
And who was that girl?
Look,
David isn't here, all right?
She thought she heard David in the house, and she thought he was probably with the nanny. She was really, really just distraught.
Ruth called the Findlaters twice more, then asked Desmond to drive her there. When they arrived, David's car was parked outside.
You threw her at him.
David!
He's left you, Ruth. You won't see him ever again.
You're lying.
I have only ever told you the truth. You've never wanted to hear it.
You can't just walk away with everything in ruins.
She said, you know, he's let me down. He's let my son down. He promised he would do this. I've paid for everything. I've lost everything. I'm entitled to show my anger.
Honestly, let me.
That anger was building, that quiet anger that she felt. She just couldn't see a way out.
Over the Easter weekend, Desmond drove Ruth between the Findlaters in North London and Buckinghamshire several times looking for David.
I just wish he was dead. I wish he was dead. I wish he would jump in a lake and drown and I could just be free.
It is now believed that Desmond gave Ruth a gun and taught her how to shoot it. Her son, Andre, later remembers seeing the weapon. Desmond took Ruth to her flat, where she put her son to bed. It's thought he then drove her back to the Findlaters and left her there. As David's car wasn't to be seen, she walked to the nearby Magdala pub.
On the Easter Sunday evening, Ruth came down from Tanzer Road behind me, and she knew that David and Clive had gone into this pub here, the Magdala, to get some more supplies for their party. She was looking through the window here.
2 packs of cigarettes. Come on, because we're having a party round the corner.
Leave the poor girl alone.
David and Clive came out of the door there. Clive went across to the passenger door. Ruth shouted to David.
David!
And he tried to ignore her.
Ruth, what are you...
And she fired at him. She fired 2 more shots.
Bullets puncture several of David's major organs. He died within minutes.
And while he collapsed on the pavement completely, she brought the gun up to her temple and brought it right up, and her hands started to shake. It was a very, very brutal shooting. It did come across as being so cold-blooded. She was so focused on what she wanted to do, what she felt she had to do.
Ruth was arrested and taken to Hampstead Police Station, where she confessed to killing David. Her solicitor was this man, John Bickford, who spoke about the case 20 years later.
On the face of it, the phrase an open and shut case is virtually irresistible.
It looked like it, and that was why the police didn't bother too much to trace the story about the gun originally.
He was always very kind and considerate, very focused, and very, very keen on getting the facts before he made any decisions.
Ruth told the police she was given the gun by a customer at her club years earlier, insisting no one else was involved. Then asked Bickford to tell Desmond that she'd forgotten to mention the gun had come from a customer.
He said, well, the truth is that I, in fact, gave her the gun, but the police don't know that. And on her own insistence, he cleaned the gun, oiled it, cleaned all the bullets, put them in the gun, and Then they went in the car together with the gun, with the loaded gun, in search of Blakely.
In his statement to the police, Desmond said he had never seen Ruth with the gun and didn't know where it came from. It was the story he stuck to for the rest of his life.
Let me state quite clearly, I did not give Ruth the gun, nor on that occasion did I drive her up to Hampstead.
While Ruth insisted he had, she refused to allow Bickford to use that in her defence. She wanted to protect Desmond because he'd supported her and her son over the last few months.
She accepted her fate, an eye for an eye, and that the crime would be, repaid.
She believed it was a fair exchange then to give her life for his life, like a certain equalizing of justice. And there was also the peace that came with knowing that that torment was over.
I think almost, she thought she'd be reunited with David.
In a letter to David's mother, Ruth wrote, "I shall die loving your son, and you shall be content knowing that his death has been repaid."
Very few women commit murder. And so the idea that she was charged with murder would have fascinated the general public and the media at that time.
She insisted on going into court looking very well dressed, re-blonded her hair in prison. So she came across to the jury as quite a hard-bitten character.
Ruth only had a few defences available to her under 1955 law: self-defence, insanity, proving her innocence, and provocation.
If David did something so terrible to you, it caused you to temporarily lose control, that could be a defence.
Provocation caused by David's increasing violence and her subsequent miscarriage seemed to be her best option, but the odds weren't great.
The law then was that in order to plead provocation, you had to show that the act that provoked you came immediately before your action. And that wasn't the case in Ruth Ellis. The actions had accumulated over many months.
The trial judge was Cecil Havers, whose actor grandson Nigel would subsequently play him in the drama about the case.
I have very fond memories of my grandfather. I adored him, really. He was a kind-hearted man, and I do know that he had great sympathy for Ruth.
It was a commonplace for people to say, well, she must have had it coming to her. He must have been pushed to the edge. The assumptions always were that women had brought things onto their own heads. Her leading counsel was a man called Melford Stevenson. He wouldn't have understood what a woman might be feeling with this kind of level of rejection. The violence that displayed that rejection, the idea that she was being told that she was really a trollop and that she was of no value, the way in which she was so physically hurt that she loses her pregnancy.
Ruth's fate was sealed by prosecution barrister Christmas Humphrey's cross-examination.
Mrs. Ellis, when you fired that revolver at close range into the body of David Blakely, what did you intend to do?
Her answer was, it is obvious, I intended to kill him.
She said on every occasion, no, I intended to kill him. And the more you say that, I'm afraid, the more the jury will convict you of murder.
In John Bickford's discussions of Ruth Ellis, he said, of course, the facts were totally against us. We had no real hope of securing an acquittal for her.
He tried desperately hard to make her say in front of the jury that she didn't intend to kill the man. She was just driven to shoot him because of provocation. Sadly, she refused.
In the end, the defence failed to convince the court that Ruth had been provoked, as defined by the laws of the time.
The whole trial was a shambles. Her defence was pitiful.
The trial lasted 2 days. It really took no time at all for the jury to decide on their verdict.
On June the 21st, Ruth Ellis was found guilty of murder at the Old Bailey and sentenced to death in accordance with the law.
As Ruth waited in Holloway Prison's condemned cell, a public campaign began to have her sentence commuted.
During those 3 weeks, while public controversy mounted, one man had a terrible decision to make: Home Secretary William Lloyd George. He had to decide whether or not to write the grim words, "The law must take its course."
I know it upset my grandfather enormously. He wrote a letter to the Home Secretary expressing she did not deserve to be hanged. Simple as that.
Others wrote to Home Secretary Gwilym Lloyd George, pleading him to show mercy, while 50,000 people from around the world signed a petition asking for clemency.
People had realised that this young woman with 2 young children, who was just trying to make her way in the world, who was let down by so many men. I think there was a sense of everyone realising that it was slightly inhumane.
Despite public pressure, Lloyd George refused to grant Ruth a reprieve.
I remember looking at the little small Judas hole in the door, and she was sat down at a table with 2 wardresses at each side of her.
She tried to save herself at the 11th hour. She knew a reprieve wasn't going to happen. She realised that Andy wasn't going to be looked after by Desmond, so she needed to be there to look after Andy.
Ruth sacks her solicitor, John Bickford, accusing him of colluding with Desmond, and replaces him with Victor Mishcon, her former divorce solicitor.
He wanted her to get clemency so that she would serve a life imprisonment, but not be hanged.
Why has she fired you?
I've been carrying a bomb in my briefcase, and I didn't have the guts to detonate it.
He looked at me and said, "Try and get her to tell you who gave her the gun."
Mishcon tells Ruth to give a new statement about where she got the gun, and to tell the truth.
Didn't she owe it to her son that he should know the truth?
Ruth tells Mishcon that Desmond loaded and oiled the gun before he drove her to Hampstead.
She said, "I haven't said any of this before," and she used the word I remember so well, "it would have been traitorous." She was facing what she did. Why bring somebody else punishment when it wasn't necessary?
I need the permanent Under-Secretary of State.
He's at Ascot.
Well, get him bloody back from Ascot.
What message should I give?
Tell him Ruth Ellis isn't going to hang tomorrow.
Scotland Yard detectives are tasked to find Desmond and question him about the gun.
I think that a jury knowing that someone had shown her how to use a gun had helped her in that way. I think that Cousins might have ended up being in the dock as an accessory as well. And once you have that, then you start opening up the context. I'm not sure that it would have led to an acquittal, but I think it probably would have led to clemency. And that's the important thing.
Victor Mishcon gets a call. Desmond can't be found. Ruth's last hope is gone.
For the hundreds who waited at Holloway Jail on execution morning, and for the millions who stayed away, 3 questions remain. Should a woman hang? Should anyone hang at all? Or should there be degrees of murder?
Ruth wakes up, writes her final letters, and eats her last breakfast. Then Holloway's governor receives a call, reportedly from the Home Office, suggesting a last-minute reprieve for Ruth.
1 minute too, Mum.
You can't make her wait. It's torture. I mean, it's got to be a hoax.
The call was a hoax. The execution could carry on.
Follow me.
Pierpoint steps up to the gallows.
She came to me as though she was just walking the ordinary way, walked right to me.
And as soon as she hears his feet stop moving, she then probably knows that the next sound she'll hear is some form of lever. A lever to death. It's quite a horrible kind of thought.
Don't worry, lass. I won't hurt you.
I can't begin to imagine what was going on in her head. She maintained her composure, though, really right up until the very end.
She never spoke to me. I can see her now, just flicked her eyes and she just puckered her lips so she's trying to smile, you know. She's a brave woman.
Georgina was only 3 years old, and Andre was just 10 when their mother was executed.
My mum was a larger-than-life character, very similar to Ruth in some ways, with the peroxide blonde hair. She could turn a room immediately. She could turn a man very quickly, but she was ultimately very fun and bubbly. She had found the desire to move to London as well, to also chase the bright lights. Wanted to get onto films, to be a singer.
I had a group of girlfriends around sort of the age of 13, 14. They would sit next to me in class and draw the hangman game and then sort of pass the paper towards me. It was, very hard. Mum was so prolific. She almost created this sort of media circus around Ruth's name. And I just didn't want to be a part of that.
I lost my mother when I was around 11 years old, and I was always trying to understand, what drove her, what made her the woman she was, what was she seeking, which was ultimately her identity.
Georgina was 8 when she first learned the truth about her mother's death.
I discovered the cuttings, and there they were. There the story was, all in front of me. So I realized I saw the picture of her and remembered her as a small child.
Georgina passed away in 2001 at the age of 50 after a long battle with cancer.
The ripple effect has affected all of us. It's been a heavy burden. It's almost felt like I've been swimming in wet clothes. I spent sort of 40-something years avoiding the subject, not talking about it.
The controversy around Ruth's execution led to major changes in law. In 1957, the defence of diminished responsibility was established, A defence that could have prevented Ruth's execution.
Her death really gave the campaign for abolition to stop execution. It gave it its emotional spur. She was very young. She was in her 20s still. But unfortunately, she fell in love with David, and I think she did die loving him.
It's very, very sad, and 2 lives that didn't make it to 30. And one of them didn't deserve it, and the other shouldn't have done it. What her grandchildren, family have gone through, I can certainly appreciate and understand that side of the tragedy.
She is a murderer, but she didn't deserve to be taken from the world in the way that she was. And equally, I have huge sympathy for David Blakely's family. He was a young man. He had the world ahead of him. He equally didn't deserve to die, which is why ultimately, the whole story is sadness.
Ruth was a trailblazer in life. She was a trailblazer in death. Ultimately, this case triggered major judicial reform in the UK. She didn't die in vain. And I take some comfort from that.
And if you or anyone you know has been affected by issues raised in this programme, you can visit itv.com/advice for support information. Next, the ITV News at 10.